The gun was heavy against Desiderio's ribs, a comforting weight after a night of spilled blood and broken promises. He walked into his penthouse, expecting the usual crushing silence, the cold emptiness he paid millions to maintain. Instead, he found a lump under his silk sheets. A trespasser. He drew his weapon, flipping the covers back, fully prepared to end a life. But he didn't find a rival assassin. He found Kaylee, the quiet girl who polished his floors, shivering in her sleep. The air in the penthouse smelled like ozone and expensive leather. It was 3 a.m. Desiderio Edwards locked the reinforced steel door behind him, the heavy thud reverberating through the entryway. He leaned against the frame for a fraction of a second, closing his eyes. His left knuckles were split and purpling. A faint smear of someone else's blood stained the cuff of his $2,000 suit. Tonight had been a disaster. The docks were supposed to be secure. The shipment was supposed to be untraceable. Instead, it was a bloodbath. 2 of his men were dead, and the shipment was ashes floating in the harbor. Someone had talked. He shrugged off his jacket, letting it drop to the imported hardwood floor. He didn't care. He unholstered his Glock 19, keeping it in his right hand. Old habits died hard, and tonight, paranoia was a survival trait. The penthouse was entirely dark, save for the ambient neon bleeding in from the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom. His footsteps made no sound. He noticed the anomalies immediately. A vacuum cleaner was pushed hastily into an alcove, its cord still plugged into the wall but tangled. The cleaning supplies cart was abandoned near the guest bathroom. The staff had strict orders to be gone by sunset. Desiderio paid them excessively well to be invisible. His grip on the gun tightened. He thumbed off the safety. He approached his bedroom door. It was cracked open an inch. He nudged it with the toe of his leather shoe. It swung silently on its hinges. The bed was the centerpiece of the room, a massive, custom-built structure draped in dark charcoal sheets. Right in the center, a distinctly human-shaped lump disrupted the pristine, flat surface. Desiderio didn't breathe. He didn't call out. He moved with the terrifying, practiced efficiency of a man who had survived a dozen attempts on his life. He stepped to the side of the bed, raising the barrel of the gun. He reached out with his left hand, grabbed the edge of the heavy duvet, and ripped it back. The gun leveled squarely at the center of a forehead. The person gasped, jerking awake. It wasn't a rival hitman. It wasn't a seasoned killer sent by the Rossi family. It was a woman. She was small, swimming in an oversized gray uniform that marked her as part of his household staff. Her dark hair was frizzy, plastered to her cheek by sweat. She blinked against the dim light, her eyes wide, entirely dilated with raw, primal terror as she stared down the black barrel of his gun. "Give me one reason," Desiderio said. His voice was a flat, dead calm. No anger, just a promise of imminent violence. "One reason I shouldn't put a bullet through your skull right now." The maid didn't scream. Her chest heaved, breath hitching in her throat, but she didn't thrash or beg. She stared at the gun, then slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. "Because," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, trembling so violently he almost couldn't hear her. "Because if I left this room, they would know I found it." Desiderio frowned, the gun remaining perfectly steady. "Found what?" Kaylee swallowed hard. She slowly raised her hands, showing her empty palms. She pointed a trembling finger toward the headboard. "Under your mattress, left side, about a foot down." Desiderio didn't look away from her. "You move a muscle, you die. I'm not moving," she said. He kept the gun aimed at her chest and used his free hand to feel along the edge of the mattress. He slid his fingers between the heavy fabric and the wooden frame. About 12 inches down, his fingertips brushed against something cold and hard. It wasn't fabric. It was plastic and metal. A tiny node, no bigger than a coin, fastened with a heavy-duty adhesive. He pinched it, peeling it free. He pulled it up into the dim light. It was a high-frequency, long-range transmitter. A bug. Military-grade. The kind that didn't run on standard batteries but drew trace ambient power, making it incredibly hard to sweep for. It was active. A tiny, nearly invisible red diode pulsed on its underside. Desiderio stared at the device. The blood in his veins turned to ice. Someone had bypassed the biometric locks on his private elevator, dodged the internal security cameras, and planted a listening device directly under where he slept. The only people with that kind of access were his most trusted circle. He looked back at the maid. She was sitting up now, her knees pulled to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Who are you?" he asked. The threat of immediate death was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating interrogation. "Kaylee," she said. "Kaylee Blackwood. I've been on the cleaning rotation for 3 months. Why didn't you go to my security? Why sleep in my bed?" Kaylee let out a short, hollow sound that might have been a laugh if she wasn't so terrified. "Go to your security. Mr. Edwards, the man who planted that bug was your head of security." Desiderio froze. "Paul? I don't know his name," Kaylee said, finding a shred of desperate courage. "Tall, buzz cut, scar through his left eyebrow. He wears the expensive suits like you do, but they don't fit him right. I was dusting the vents in the hallway. I saw him come in here. He didn't see me. I watched him plant it." Desiderio processed the information. Paul, the man who had been riding in the armored car with him 3 hours ago. The man who had secured the docks right before the ambush. The pieces snapped together with a sickening crunch. Paul had sold him out. Paul was feeding the enemy his exact coordinates. "Why didn't you leave?" Desiderio demanded. "He locked down the elevators," Kaylee said. "I heard him talking into an earpiece. He said he was putting the penthouse on lockdown until you got back. The service elevator requires a key card after 9 p.m. My supervisor took mine when she left at 5. If I walked out into that hallway, he would have seen me on the cameras. He would have known I was here while he was planting it." She looked down at her hands. They were raw and red from bleach and hot water. "I hid in the closet, but it was freezing, and I haven't slept in 2 days. I work a second job. I sat on the edge of the bed to wait for you to come home to tell you. I just sat down for a minute. I didn't mean to fall asleep." Her reason left him completely speechless. It wasn't a masterstroke of espionage. It wasn't a convoluted trap. It was the crushing, mundane reality of exhaustion. She had stumbled into a mafia conspiracy, and her biggest crime was being too tired to stay awake while hiding for her life. Desiderio slowly lowered the gun. He didn't put the safety back on. "They heard everything," Desiderio said softly, staring at the bug in his hand. "They're listening right now." Kaylee's eyes widened. "They heard me." "No," Desiderio said, rolling the device between his thumb and forefinger. "It's a localized pickup, voices from the mattress up. It wouldn't catch much beyond a few feet." He looked at her. She was a liability. A civilian who knew his head of security was a rat. The easiest, cleanest way to handle this was to put a bullet in her head and throw her body in the harbor, along with the ashes of his shipment. But Kaylee Blackwood had just saved his life. If she hadn't found that bug, Desiderio would have made his usual phone calls tomorrow morning. He would have arranged the retaliation strike from this very bed. Paul would have known everything. Desiderio would be dead by noon. "Get up," Desiderio said. Kaylee scrambled off the bed. She stood awkwardly, clutching her hands in front of her. "We need to talk," Desiderio said, crushing the tiny device under the heel of his shoe until he heard a distinct snap. "And you need to tell me exactly what you saw." The penthouse was silent again, but the texture of the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was pressurized, heavy with the weight of impending violence. Desiderio poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on the living room bar. He didn't offer Kaylee any. She stood near the edge of the large Persian rug, looking incredibly out of place among the velvet couches and modernist art. She kept shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her cheap, slip-resistant shoes squeaking faintly against the floor. "Sit," Desiderio commanded, gesturing to a leather armchair. Kaylee sat. She perched on the very edge of the cushion, her back rigidly straight. He took a sip of the amber liquid. It burned on the way down, grounding him. He analyzed her. No jewelry, frayed cuffs on her uniform, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of chronic sleep deprivation. She wasn't a plant. The rival families wouldn't use someone so visibly broken down. They preferred polished, beautiful honey traps. Kaylee was just collateral damage, trying desperately not to become a statistic. "Tell me about Paul," Desiderio said, sitting on the sofa opposite her. He rested his forearms on his knees, staring at her with the intensity of a predator. Kaylee swallowed. "I told you. I saw him plant the thing." "Details, Kaylee. My life depends on details, which means your life depends on them too." She flinched slightly at the casual mention of her life. He came in around 8 p.m. The rest of the staff had cleared out. I was supposed to be gone too, but someone spilled red wine on the rug in the guest suite, and I knew if it set overnight, they'd fire me. So I stayed behind to scrub it. I was in the hall, up on a step stool, dusting the air vents, when the private elevator chimed. He didn't see the step stool. I pulled it into the alcove. I hide when the security guys come up. They're mean, and they have wandering hands. Desiderio's jaw tightened. He didn't tolerate his men treating the civilian staff like garbage. It was sloppy, and it bred resentment. Resentment bred betrayal. "Go on." "He went straight to your room. He was on his phone, not a radio, a burner phone, the cheap plastic kind." He said, "The package is in place. Wait for the feed." Then he shoved the phone back in his pocket, planted the bug, and left. He went into the security room down the hall and locked the door. Desiderio nodded slowly. The security room controlled the cameras for the entire floor. Paul could sit in there, monitor the feeds, and ensure no one tampered with the bug until Desiderio returned. But Paul hadn't checked the bedroom itself before locking himself in the camera room. A fatal error. "Are you going to kill me?" Kaylee asked. The question was blunt, devoid of hysterics. It was the cynical resignation of someone who had been handed a terrible hand by life and expected nothing less. Desiderio looked at his scotch, swirling it in the glass. "That depends, Kaylee. Do you have a family?" "A mother," she said. Her voice tightened. "She's in a care facility in Queens. Dementia. It costs $6,000 a month." "Is that the second job?" "I work the night shift at a diner off 4th. That covers rent. This job covers her. If you die, she stops getting care." "Yes, then you have a very strong incentive to keep your mouth shut," Desiderio said. He set the glass down on the coffee table. "Here is the reality of your situation. You are currently the only person in this building I know for a fact isn't trying to murder me. Paul is compromised. If I kill Paul right now, whoever is paying him will know I found the bug. They will panic, and they will strike before I have time to figure out how deep the rot goes. Kaylee watched him, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. So what do we do? We? Desiderio arched an eyebrow. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. There is no we, Kaylee. There is me solving my problem, and you trying not to get caught in the crossfire. But you can't leave. If Paul sees you walk out of here in the morning, he'll know you were in the penthouse all night. He'll check the logs, see you never took the elevator down, and realize you were in here when he planted the device. He will kill you just to be safe. Kaylee closed her eyes. A shudder racked her thin frame. I can't afford to die, Mr. Edwards. Then you do exactly as I say. Desiderio stood up. He walked over to a heavy oak desk in the corner and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a spare magazine for his Glock. Tomorrow morning, Paul and my underboss, Vincent, are coming up here for a debrief. I need to act like tonight was just a bad night at the office. I need to pretend I don't know there's a bounty on my head. What about me? You are going to serve us coffee, Desiderio said smoothly. You are going to act perfectly normal. You are a maid doing her job. But I wasn't supposed to be here overnight. They'll know something is wrong. Desiderio paused. He looked at her, really looked at her. The oversized uniform, the exhaustion. He needed a cover story for her presence, a reason she was still in the penthouse the morning after the boss came home. Take the uniform off, Desiderio said. Kaylee froze. The blood drained from her face. What? You heard me. Take it off. Underneath, I assume you have civilian clothes? Just a t-shirt and jeans. Good enough. Take the uniform off. Desiderio turned his back to her, giving her a shred of privacy. He walked to the master bedroom. I'll find you one of my dress shirts. It will look appropriately disheveled. I don't understand, Kaylee said, her voice rising in panic. She didn't move. Desiderio stopped in the doorway and looked back over his shoulder. He met her panicked gaze with cold, uncompromising logic. If you are in a maid's uniform, you are a security breach. If you are wearing my oversized dress shirt, making coffee in my kitchen, you are a one-night stand. Men like Paul don't question a boss bringing a woman home. They don't respect women enough to view them as threats. You won't be a maid who saw too much. You'll just be a conquest. Kaylee stared at him. The sheer transactional cruelty of the lie hit her hard. She was going to have to play the part of a wealthy mobster's plaything to survive. It was degrading. It was disgusting. But it was a shield. She reached up with shaking fingers and unbuttoned the grey uniform collar. Fine, she said, her voice bitter and hard. But I expect a massive tip when this is over. Desiderio actually smirked, a genuine, fleeting expression. Survive tomorrow, Kaylee, and I'll pay for your mother's care for the rest of her life. The sun broke over the New York skyline, painting the clouds in bruises of purple and red. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with the scent of dark roast coffee. Desiderio sat at the marble kitchen island. He had showered, changing into a fresh pair of dark slacks and a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the heavy silver watch on his left wrist and the faint, faded scars on his forearms. He looked immaculate, completely detached from the blood that had been on his hands mere hours ago. Kaylee stood by the espresso machine. She felt ridiculous. She was wearing one of Desiderio's white, button-down shirts. It swallowed her whole, the hem stopping mid-thigh, the sleeves rolled up clumsily past her elbows. Her hair was down, falling in a messy, frizzy halo around her shoulders. Desiderio had told her to smudge a little mascara under her eyes to look appropriately worn out. She hated everything about it. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply uncomfortable. "Stop fidgeting," Desiderio murmured, not looking up from the tablet in front of him. He was reviewing the casualty list from the docks. "I feel naked," Kaylee hissed back, keeping her voice low. "You look exactly how you need to look. Stop acting like a terrified maid and start acting like a woman who thinks she hit the jackpot last night." Before Kaylee could formulate an angry response, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open. 2 men stepped out. The first was Vincent Moretti, Desiderio's underboss. He was a sharply dressed man in his late 40s, silver hair slicked back, eyes sharp and calculating. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who commanded absolute respect. Behind him was Paul. Kaylee felt her stomach drop into her feet. Paul was taller than Vincent, built like a linebacker. He wore a dark suit that stretched too tightly across his broad shoulders. He had a military buzz cut, and the thick, jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow just as she had described. His eyes scanned the room with the mechanical precision of a predator, looking for weakness. "Dom," Vincent said, walking toward the kitchen. His face was grave. "Rough night, you could say that, Vince," Desiderio replied, not looking up from his tablet. He took a sip of his coffee. "Total loss at the docks. Rossi's men knew exactly where we were." Paul stepped out from behind Vincent, his gaze sweeping the kitchen. His eyes locked onto Kaylee. He stopped dead, his brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise and sudden suspicion crossing his heavy features. "Who's this?" Paul asked. His voice was gravelly, carrying an undercurrent of hostility. Desiderio finally looked up. He gave Kaylee a lazy, dismissive glance before looking back at Paul. "Company. Don't worry about her." Vincent raised an eyebrow, looking from Kaylee to Desiderio. "Didn't know you were bringing anyone back last night, Dom, especially after the mess we walked into." "I needed a distraction," Desiderio lied smoothly. He leaned back in his chair, exuding absolute authority. "She was at the club. We left before the dock meet. She stayed here." Paul's eyes narrowed. He was staring hard at Kaylee, analyzing her face. Kaylee felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She forced herself to lean against the counter, crossing her arms to stop her hands from shaking. She tried to channel every apathetic, bored waitress she worked with at the diner. She looked at Paul and gave him a dull, unimpressed stare. "Can I get you guys coffee?" Kaylee asked. Her voice cracked slightly, but she managed to play it off as morning grogginess. "Or do you just want to stand there staring at me?" Vincent chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Got a mouth on her. No coffee for me, sweetheart. We have business." Paul didn't laugh. He took a step closer to the island. "You were here all night?" he asked Kaylee directly. "Yeah," Kaylee said, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "Is that a problem?" "Just checking," Paul said slowly. "Security protocols. I didn't see you on the cameras coming up." "She came up the back way, Paul," Desiderio cut in, his voice taking on a hard, warning edge. "Through the private garage, before you locked down the floor. Are we going to discuss my sex life, or are we going to discuss how half my crew got slaughtered last night?" The tension in the room spiked. Paul immediately backed down, lowering his chin in a gesture of submission. "My apologies, boss. Just doing my job." "Do it better," Desiderio snapped. He tossed the tablet onto the counter. "Someone leaked the route. I want to know who knew the schedule, and I want to know by noon." "I've got the tech guys scrubbing the comms right now," Paul said smoothly. It was a perfect lie. He sounded entirely professional. "If there's a rat, we'll find him. See that you do." Desiderio stood up. "Vince, my office. We need to look at the retaliation targets. Paul, secure the perimeter." I don't want anyone else on this floor." "Understood," Paul said. He gave Kaylee one last, lingering look, a look filled with cold, calculating doubt, before turning on his heel and heading back toward the elevator. Vincent clapped Desiderio on the shoulder, and they walked down the hall toward the Home Office. Kaylee was left alone in the kitchen. Her knees instantly gave out. She slumped against the marble counter, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, gasping for air. She had done it. She had lied to a killer's face. But as she sat there, the adrenaline fading into a cold sweat, her mind raced. She replayed the brief interaction. Paul's eyes hadn't just been suspicious. When he looked at her face, there had been a flicker of recognition. She squeezed her eyes shut. Where did he know me from? Then it hit her. The step stool. She had pulled the step stool into the alcove, but she had left the spray bottle of industrial cleaner on the floor, right outside the bedroom door. She had been too panicked to grab it. If Paul had noticed the spray bottle last night, he knew a maid was on the floor. And if he recognized her face from the staff files, Kaylee scrambled to her feet. She had to tell Desiderio. The cover story wasn't going to hold. Paul knew she wasn't a girl from the club. Paul knew she was the maid, which meant Paul knew she had been in the hallway when he planted the bug. She started down the hall toward the office, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. She was out of time. The hallway stretched before Kaylee like a tunnel. Her bare feet made soft, muted slaps against the polished hardwood, the only sound beneath the frantic rushing of blood in her ears. The heavy mahogany door to Desiderio's office was closed, but the low, intense baritone of Vincent's voice bled through the wood. She pressed her hand flat against the doorframe, trying to steady herself. If she burst in screaming about a spray bottle, Vincent would know she wasn't just a random girl from a club. Desiderio had been clear. Vincent was his underboss. But right now, trust was a luxury that got people killed. She had to play the part. Kaylee took a ragged breath, smoothed down the front of the oversized dress shirt, and turned the heavy brass knob. The door clicked open. Both men stopped talking instantly. The office was a testament to cold, hard power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, while a massive glass desk dominated the center of the room. Desiderio sat behind it, a topographic map of the city spread out over the glass. Vincent was leaning over the desk, a red marker in his hand. They both looked up, their expressions hardening. "I thought I said I was working," Desiderio said. His voice was a whip crack, sharp and unforgiving. He was playing his role perfectly. Kaylee forced her shoulders to relax, leaning her weight against the door jamb in a sloppy, arrogant pose she had seen 100 times from the wealthy patrons at the diner. "I know. But I lost my earring. The diamond one. I think it's in your bedroom, but I can't find it." Vincent let out a long, heavy sigh, tossing the red marker onto the map. He looked at Desiderio with open disgust. "Dom. Really? We're bleeding territory, and you're dealing with this? Give me 2 minutes," Desiderio said to Vincent, his jaw tight. He stood up, rounding the desk with long, predatory strides. He grabbed Kaylee by the bicep, hard enough to bruise, playing the angry lover for Vincent's benefit, and hauled her out into the hallway, pulling the office door shut behind them. The moment the latch clicked, Desiderio's anger vanished. His grip on her arm loosened, though he didn't let go. His dark eyes scanned her face, reading the sheer panic threatening to crack her facade. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "The spray bottle," Kaylee breathed, her words tumbling out in a rushed, terrified stream. "Last night, when I hid from Paul, I pulled the step stool into the alcove, but I left the bottle of carpet cleaner right outside your bedroom door. I forgot it. Desiderio's expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Paul was looking at me in the kitchen, Kaylee continued, her fingernails biting into her own palms, he wasn't just checking out a girl you brought home. He was looking at my face. He recognized me. The staff files have our photos. If he saw the cleaner last night, he knows a maid was on the floor. Desiderio released her arm. He didn't swear. He didn't panic. He simply looked down the long, empty corridor toward the foyer. He didn't take the elevator, Desiderio stated. It wasn't a question. Kaylee blinked. What? The private elevator chimes when it goes down. It hasn't chimed. Desiderio reached under the back of his suit jacket and drew his weapon, the dark metal stark against his crisp clothing. He's in the security room. He's pulling the personnel files to confirm your face. What do we do? Kaylee asked, her voice cracking. You go to the master bathroom, lock the door, sit in the tub and keep your head down. Desiderio, go. The command left no room for argument. It was absolute. Kaylee turned and ran. She didn't look back. She hit the master bedroom, scrambled past the massive, ruined bed, and threw herself into the attached marble bathroom. She slammed the door, twisted the heavy deadbolt, and climbed into the deep, soaking tub, curling her knees to her chest. The cold porcelain seeped through the thin cotton shirt. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands over her ears. But it wasn't enough to block out the silence of the penthouse. Out in the hallway, Desiderio moved with lethal purpose. He bypassed his bedroom entirely, heading toward the east wing where the security hub was located. The hallway was lined with modern art, abstract splashes of color that seemed mocking in the sterile, tense atmosphere. He reached the heavy steel door of the security room. The digital keypad next to the handle glowed a soft blue. Paul had locked it from the inside. Desiderio didn't bother with the keypad. He knew the structural weak points of his own home. He drew back his foot and delivered a brutal, shattering kick to the wall right beside the keypad, smashing the drywall inward. He reached into the jagged hole, found the primary wiring harness, and yanked. The blue light on the keypad died. The magnetic lock disengaged with a dull clack. Desiderio shoved the door open, stepping into the room with his gun raised. The room was bathed in the pale glow of a dozen monitors, showing different angles of the penthouse and the building's exterior. In the center of the room, Paul was sitting at the primary terminal. On the largest screen, Kaylee's employee ID photo was displayed, her tired, unsmiling face blown up in high definition. Paul spun around in his chair, his hand dropping toward the holster at his hip. "Don't," Desiderio said. Paul froze. His hand hovered an inch above the grip of his sidearm. He looked at the Glock aimed squarely at his chest, then up at Desiderio's face. He didn't see anger. He saw a void, and that terrified him more than anything else. "Boss," Paul said, his voice tight but remarkably steady. He slowly raised his hands, keeping them in plain sight. "What is this?" "You tell me," Desiderio said, stepping further into the room and kicking the door shut behind him. "You're looking at my maid's file instead of hunting the rat who sold out the docks." Paul's eyes darted toward the monitor, then back to Desiderio. The lie fell away. The heavy, ugly truth settled into the cramped space. "She was here last night. I saw the cleaning supplies. And you put a listening device under my mattress." Paul swallowed. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "They have my brother, Dom. The Rossi family. They took him 2 days ago. They said if I didn't feed them your roots, they'd send him back to me in pieces." It was a deeply human excuse. A desperate man making a desperate choice to save blood. A year ago, Desiderio might have felt a flicker of sympathy, but the men at the docks had families too. They had bled out on the concrete because Paul chose his own blood over his oath. "You should have come to me," Desiderio said softly. "You would have killed him," Paul shot back, his voice rising, a frantic edge breaking through his composure. "You would have considered him compromised and cut our losses. You know it's true." "I guess we'll never know." Paul made his move. It was fast, born of pure survival instinct. He lunged to the side, sweeping a heavy coffee mug off the desk toward Desiderio's face while diving for his own gun. Desiderio didn't flinch. He sidestepped the flying ceramic and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the small, soundproofed room. The bullet caught Paul in the center of his chest. The kinetic force threw him backward, his heavy frame crashing into the bank of servers behind the desk. He slid down the metal grating, leaving a thick, dark smear of crimson in his wake. His gun clattered uselessly to the floor. Desiderio kept his weapon raised, stepping forward. The smell of cordite and burned hair filled the air, bitter and acrid. Paul was gasping, his hands clutching his ruined chest. Blood bubbled past his lips, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked up at Desiderio, trying to speak, but only a wet, choked rattle came out. Desiderio looked down at him. There was no triumph. There was just the grim, mechanical reality of taking out the trash. He aimed at Paul's forehead. "For the men at the docks," Desiderio said, and pulled the trigger a second time. The room went completely still. Only the low hum of the cooling fans broke the silence. Desiderio lowered his gun. He engaged the safety and slid it back into his holster. He didn't look at the body again. He turned to the primary terminal. Kayleigh's face was still staring back at him from the screen. He leaned over the keyboard, entered his master override code, and deleted the entire personnel file. He wiped the search history. He purged the camera logs from the last 24 hours. Then he took a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. He had to deal with Vincent now. He walked out of the security room, locking the door manually behind him. Back in the master bathroom, Kayleigh was hyperventilating. She had heard the muffled pops through the thick walls. 2 of them, spaced a few seconds apart. They didn't sound like the gunshots in the movies. They sounded like someone dropping a heavy textbook onto a concrete floor. Flat. Final. The handle of the bathroom door rattled. Kayleigh let out a choked sob, scrambling backward in the empty tub until her back hit the tile wall. "Kayleigh, open the door." It was Desiderio. His voice was calm, entirely level. With shaking hands, Kayleigh reached up and twisted the deadbolt. The door pushed open. Desiderio stood in the doorway. He looked exactly as he had 10 minutes ago, except for a faint spray of microscopic red droplets on the pristine white cuff of his right sleeve. Kayleigh stared at the blood. Her stomach violently heaved. She clamped a hand over her mouth, turning her head away, fighting the intense urge to vomit. "It's done," Desiderio said. "You killed him," Kayleigh whispered through her fingers, her entire body trembling. "Oh my God, you killed him!" "He was going to kill you," Desiderio stated, stepping into the bathroom and looking down at her. "He knew you were the maid. He would have put a bullet in your head and dumped you down the trash chute to cover his tracks. I saved your life." "You saved your own life," Kayleigh snapped, the terror briefly morphing into sharp, frantic anger. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't pretend you did this for me. You did it because he betrayed you." Desiderio's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't argue. He appreciated the clarity. She wasn't blinded by some ridiculous notion of chivalry. She saw the world exactly for what it was, a meat grinder. "Vincent heard the shots," Desiderio said. "He's waiting in the hallway. I told him Paul drew on me. I told him Paul was the rat. Does Vincent believe you? Vincent believes the evidence. I have the burner phone from Paul's pocket and the bug from under the bed. That's enough to close the loop on the docks. Desiderio reached down, offering his hand. But it doesn't change your situation. You're still a civilian in a war zone. Get up. Kaylee looked at his hand, the hand that had just ended a human life. She didn't take it. She gripped the edge of the tub and pulled herself up on her own, her legs feeling like lead. What happens now? She asked, her voice hollow. Now we go out there, and you play the part of a terrified girl who just realized the man she slept with is in the Mafia, Desiderio said, his tone turning utterly clinical. You cry. You beg to leave. I pay you off with a stack of cash from the safe, and I tell my men to escort you out of the building. It establishes the alibi. It gives you an exit. Kaylee stared at him. And then you disappear, Desiderio said. You take the money. You move your mother to a facility in a different state. You change your name, because if the Rossi family figures out Paul is dead, they will look for the leak. And if they find out a maid survived the night in my penthouse, they will hunt you down just to hurt me. The reality of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Her life in New York, her small, miserable apartment, her grueling shifts at the diner. It was all gone, simply because she was too tired to stay awake. I don't have a choice, do I? She asked quietly. In my world, Kaylee, nobody has choices, Desiderio said, turning toward the door. We just have consequences. Wipe your face. It's time to put on a show. The performance required very little acting. When Kaylee stepped out of the master bedroom and into the main living area, Vincent was waiting. He had a heavy, silenced pistol in his hand, his eyes scanning the corridor. When he saw Kaylee, his expression contorted into a mask of pure irritation. Kaylee let the terror she had been suppressing bubble to the surface. She looked at Vincent's gun, then back to the faint red droplets on Desiderio's cuff. She let out a sharp, breathless sob, her knees buckling just enough to make her stumble against the wall. He shot him! Kaylee gasped, her voice shrill, bordering on hysterical. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking slightly. He just shot him. Oh my God, I want to go home. Please, I just want to go home. Vincent lowered his weapon, shooting Desiderio a look of profound disgust. This is what you bring into my house, Dom. A liability who can't handle a loud noise? She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Desiderio said smoothly. He walked past Kaylee without offering a comforting touch, heading straight for the massive oil painting hanging above the fireplace. Paul drew on me. He was the leak. I found the burner phone. Vincent's jaw tightened. He accepted the narrative instantly, the logic too sound to dispute. Then we need to move. If Paul missed a check-in, Rossi will know we're on to them. Get rid of the girl. Desiderio pulled the oil painting outward on hidden hinges, revealing a brushed steel wall safe. He rapidly punched in a biometric code and a 6-digit PIN. The heavy door clicked open. Kaylee watched, still trembling, as Desiderio reached inside. He bypassed the stacks of gold Krugerrands and the velvet boxes of loose diamonds, pulling out thick, shrink-wrapped bricks of $100 bills. He grabbed a black leather duffel bag from the bottom shelf of a nearby bookcase and began dropping the cash inside. 1 brick, 2, 5, 10. The heavy, muted thuds of the money hitting the leather felt like hammer strikes in the quiet room. Desiderio zipped the bag shut and walked back over to Kaylee. He didn't hand it to her gently. He shoved the heavy straps into her chest, forcing her to take the weight. It dragged her arms down. It had to be at least $500,000. You take this, Desiderio said, his voice loud enough for Vincent to hear, dripping with cruel, dismissive authority. You walk out of this building, and you forget you ever met me. You forget my name. You forget what this room looks like. If you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, the cops, your friends, a priest, I will find you. Kaylee looked up into his dark, empty eyes. The threat wasn't acting. It was a genuine promise. He was saving her life, but he was also guaranteeing her silence the only way he knew how. I understand, she whispered. Leo, Vincent barked toward the foyer. A younger enforcer, sharply dressed but with the unmistakable broken nose of a street brawler, stepped out of the shadows by the front door. Walk her down to the street, Vincent ordered. Make sure she gets in a cab. If she looks back at the building, shoot her. Leo nodded, stepping forward and gripping Kaylee's upper arm with entirely too much force. Let's go, sweetheart. Kaylee didn't look at Desiderio again. She clutched the heavy leather bag to her chest, like a shield, and let Leo drag her toward the private elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off her view of the blood-splattered penthouse, the dead man down the hall, and the Mafia Boss who had just bought her entire existence. The ride down was suffocating. The elevator hummed, a low, mechanical vibration that rattled Kaylee's teeth. Leo didn't speak. He just stared at the floor numbers ticking down. When they hit the underground garage, the cold morning air hit Kaylee like a physical blow. It smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. Leo walked her past a row of armored SUVs, shoving her through a heavy fire door that led to the alleyway behind the building. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down the avenue. People in tailored coats hurried past on their way to offices, clutching coffees, entirely oblivious to the violence suspended just a few hundred feet above their heads. Leo hailed a yellow cab, ripped the back door open, and shoved Kaylee inside. JFK, Leo told the driver, tossing a crumpled $50 bill through the partition. He leaned down, locking eyes with Kaylee through the open window. Have a nice life. Make it a short flight. He slammed the door. The cab lurched forward, merging into the chaotic flow of New York traffic. Kaylee sat in the back seat, staring blankly at the vinyl partition. She was still wearing Desiderio's oversized white dress shirt over her cheap jeans. She looked down at the black leather bag resting on the seat next to her. The zipper was pulled taut. She unzipped it an inch. The smell of old paper, ink, and leather drifted up. She slowly zipped it back up. She didn't cry. The time for crying was over. She leaned forward and tapped on the plexiglass partition. Change of plans, Kaylee told the driver, her voice miraculously steady. Take me to Queens, the Sunnyvale Care Facility. 6 months passed. The coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, was a place defined by gray skies, relentless rain, and a pervasive, creeping dampness that got into your bones. It was the exact opposite of New York. There were no skyscrapers. There was no neon, just towering pines, crashing dark water, and absolute, beautiful isolation. Kaylee Blackwood was dead. The woman who walked down the sleepy main street, clutching a paper cup of black tea, went by the name Anna Vance. She wore a thick, olive-green parka and waterproof boots. Her frizzy hair was cut short, tucked beneath a gray beanie. She walked into a small, independent bookstore, the bell above the door jingling merrily. She took her place behind the counter, organizing a stack of newly arrived paperbacks. The work paid minimum wage, but she didn't need the money. The money, mostly laundered through a series of shell LLCs, Desiderio had subtly slipped instructions for into the bottom of the duffel bag, was sitting in secure accounts. Her mother was comfortably settled in a private, high-end memory care facility overlooking the ocean just 3 miles away. The nurses were kind. The food was excellent. Her mother didn't remember Kaylee's name most days, but she smiled when she saw the ocean. Kaylee had survived. She was safe. But she didn't sleep. Every night, Kaylee locked the deadbolt on her small rented cottage. Then she wedged a heavy wooden chair under the knob. She kept a small, unregistered revolver in the nightstand. The silence of the Oregon coast was meant to be peaceful. But to Kaylee, it was a blank canvas, where her mind painted shadows. Every backfiring pickup truck sounded like a suppressed gunshot. Every broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket made her heart stutter. She was a ghost, haunting her own life. 3,000 miles away, the skyline of New York City glittered like a field of crushed glass. Desiderio Edwards stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring out at the city he now entirely controlled. The war with the Rossi family had been brutal, brief, and incredibly bloody. The docks ran red for 2 weeks. Safe houses were burned. Men Desiderio had known since childhood were buried in closed caskets. But in the end, Desiderio remained standing. The Rossi patriarch was dead, floating somewhere off the coast of Staten Island. The rival factions had bent the knee. Desiderio's power was absolute, unchallenged, and entirely suffocating. The penthouse had been deeply cleaned. The drywall in the hallway was patched. The carpet in the security room was replaced. But it didn't matter. The air still felt heavy. The silence was still poisonous. The door to the office opened. Vincent walked in. He looked older. The 6-month war had carved deep lines around his mouth and added a heavy dusting of grey to his temples. He carried a manila folder, dropping it onto Desiderio's glass desk. "The final numbers from the Port Authority payoffs," Vincent said, pouring himself a scotch from the bar. "It's expensive, but the new routes are secure. Nobody touches our shipments now." "Good," Desiderio murmured, not turning away from the window. Vincent sighed, sinking into one of the leather armchairs. "You need a vacation, Dom. Go to Italy. Go to the islands. You've been locked in this glass box since the war ended." "I'm fine, Vince." Vincent set his glass down. He pointed a finger at the manila folder. "I also brought the quarterly report from the private investigators." Desiderio finally turned, his eyes locked onto the folder. Vincent shook his head, a mixture of exhaustion and confusion in his eyes. "I still don't get it. You paid her off. She's 1,000 miles away, living under a fake name, working in a bookstore. She hasn't contacted a soul from her old life. She's not a threat. Why do you have 2 guys on a rotating surveillance detail watching a civilian?" "Paranoia," Desiderio lied, walking over to the desk and opening the folder. Inside were a dozen glossy 8x10 photographs. Kaylee, Anna, now, walking in the rain. Kaylee sitting on a bench outside a nursing home. Kaylee buying groceries. She looked pale. She looked thinner. But she was alive. "It's not paranoia," Vincent said quietly. "Paranoia is putting a tracker on my car. This is something else." Desiderio ignored him. He picked up a photo of Kaylee standing behind the bookstore counter. She was looking out the window, her expression distant, heavy with a profound, unshakable exhaustion. Desiderio recognized that look perfectly. It was the same look he saw in the bathroom mirror every morning. He had saved her from Paul, but he had doomed her to a life of perpetual terror. He had bought her safety with dirty money and forced her to carry the weight of his violence. "Pull the detail," Desiderio said suddenly, closing the folder. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Pull them. Today. She's not a threat." "Done." Vincent finished his scotch and stood up. "Take my advice, Dom. Get out of the city for a few days. You're turning into a ghost." Vincent left the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Desiderio stood alone in the quiet room. He looked at the closed folder on his desk. He had told Vincent to pull the detail because he knew it was the smart, sterile, mob boss thing to do. Cut the loose thread entirely. But as he stared at the manila envelope, a crushing, irrational realization washed over him. Kaylee Blackwood was the only person in the world who had seen him entirely stripped of his armor. She had seen the blood on his hands, the panic in his eyes, the brutal, ugly mechanics of his survival, and she hadn't judged him for it. She had just survived alongside him. In a world full of liars, assassins, and yes-men, the terrified maid in the oversized dress shirt was the only real thing left in his life. Desiderio reached for his desk phone and hit a speed dial number. "Flight ops," a voice answered. "Prep the jet," Desiderio said, his voice flat, resolute. "We're going to Oregon." The Oregon rain wasn't a weather event. It was a permanent state of existence. It fell in a fine, freezing mist that coated the town of Astoria in a layer of perpetual damp. Kaylee pushed the heavy glass door of the bookstore shut, twisting the deadbolt until it locked with a satisfying, heavy thunk. She flipped the cardboard sign to "closed" and pulled her olive green parka tight around her throat. The street was mostly empty. A few pickup trucks rumbled past, their tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The streetlights flickered on, casting sickly yellow pools across the cracked sidewalks. She turned up her collar and started the 4-block walk to her cottage. She kept her head down, her hands buried deep in her pockets. Her right hand was wrapped around a canister of pepper spray. It was a reflex now, a nervous tick born of 6 months of jumping at shadows. She made it 2 blocks before she noticed the car. It was a black Audi SUV, parked illegally next to a rusted-out fire hydrant. It was entirely too clean, the rain beading perfectly on its waxed surface. It didn't belong here. It was a predator resting in a local pond. Kaylee stopped. The freezing rain soaked into her beanie, but she didn't feel the cold. Her stomach plummeted, a sickening, familiar free fall. The air in her lungs turned to ice. She took a step back, her thumb slipping the safety off of the pepper spray in her pocket. She scanned the shadows between the buildings, looking for an escape route. The driver's side door opened. Desiderio stepped out into the rain. He wasn't wearing a $2,000 suit. He wore dark jeans, heavy boots, and a charcoal wool peacoat. The collar turned up against the wind. But the clothes didn't mask the way he moved, the calculated, effortless grace of a man who owned the ground he walked on. He didn't rush toward her. He simply closed the car door and stood on the curb, letting the rain hit his face. He watched her across the 10 yards of wet pavement. Kaylee's heart slammed against her ribs. Flight instinct screamed in her ears, begging her to turn and run into the alley. But logic, cold and cynical, anchored her feet to the concrete. If Desiderio Edwards wanted her dead, she wouldn't have seen him coming. She would have taken a bullet to the back of the head while locking the bookstore door. "You told me," Kaylee called out, her voice raw, fighting the wind, "that if I ever saw you again, it meant you were here to kill me." "I did," Desiderio replied. His voice carried across the empty street, calm and entirely level. "So? Did I do something wrong? Did someone find out?" "No one found out, Kaylee. The war is over. The Rossi family is dead. You're completely clear." Kaylee stared at him, the rain blurring her vision. Anger, sharp, sudden and blindingly hot, ignited in her chest, burning away the terror. "Then what the hell are you doing here? You gave me strict instructions to disappear. I did exactly what you paid me to do. I am a ghost. You don't get to come back and haunt me." Desiderio stepped off the curb, walking slowly into the middle of the street. He stopped a few feet away from her. The harsh, yellow street lamp illuminated his face. He looked exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes rivaled hers. The cold, mechanical mask he wore in the penthouse was gone, leaving behind a hollow, deeply tired man. "I know," Desiderio said quietly. "I broke my own rule." "Why?" she demanded, taking a step backward, maintaining the distance between them. "Because my underboss handed me a file with pictures of you today, the surveillance detail. I told him to pull the team. I told him to cut the cord entirely." Desiderio kept his hands in his coat pockets, making no sudden movements. "But when I looked at the photos, I realized something. You are the only person left in my life who doesn't work for me, want to kill me, or want something from me." "I want you to leave," Kaylee snapped. "Do you?" The question wasn't arrogant, it was genuine. Kaylee opened her mouth to yell at him, to tell him to get back in his expensive car and drive back to his blood-soaked city. But the words caught in her throat. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the same jagged, ruined edges in him that she felt inside herself every time she wedged a chair under her doorknob. "You ruined my life," Kaylee whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving her hollow. "You saved me from Paul, but you killed Kaylee Blackwood. I jump when a car backfires. I don't sleep. I don't talk to anyone because I'm terrified I'll slip up and say something that gets my mother killed." "I know the feeling perfectly," Desiderio said. "I live in a glass box at the top of the city, and I trust absolutely no one. We survived that night, Kaylee, but neither of us left that apartment." A heavy silence fell between them, filled only by the relentless hiss of the rain. Kaylee let go of the pepper spray in her pocket. Her hand was cramping from gripping it so hard. "I'm freezing," Kaylee said finally, her teeth chattering. "I'm going to the diner on the corner to get a coffee. If you follow me, you buy." Desiderio's mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Deal." The diner smelled of stale fry oil and cheap bleach. It was a far cry from the marble and chrome of Desiderio's penthouse kitchen. They sat in a cracked, red vinyl booth at the back, illuminated by a buzzing neon beer sign in the window. A bored waitress dropped 2 thick ceramic mugs of black coffee on the formica table and walked away without a word. Desiderio wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into his knuckles. He looked out the window at the rain-slicked street. He looked human here. Just a man escaping the cold. "My mother doesn't know who I am anymore," Kaylee said softly, breaking the silence. She stared down at her black coffee, watching the dark liquid ripple. "The facility is amazing. She has a room looking over the water. But last week, she asked me when Kaylee was coming to visit. She thinks I'm a nurse." Desiderio looked at her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her he was sorry because apologies from men like him were meaningless. "Does she suffer?" "No," Kaylee said. "She's at peace." "Then the money did exactly what it was supposed to do." Kaylee let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Always the pragmatist. It keeps me breathing." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes across the table. "So you flew across the country because you're lonely? Forgive me, Desiderio, but mafia bosses don't strike me as the sentimental type. If you wanted company, you could buy half of Manhattan." "I don't want company," Desiderio stated, his voice flattening into that familiar, dangerous calm. I want reality. My world is built on lies. Men smile at me while calculating how much my territory is worth. Women sleep with me, hoping I'll drop a diamond necklace on the nightstand. It's transactional. It's fake." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "But you saw me at the absolute bottom. You saw the paranoia. You saw the blood. You know exactly what kind of monster I am, and you didn't flinch. You just sat on the floor and helped me clean up the mess. That is the only real thing that has happened to me in 10 years. Kaylee swallowed hard. The memory of the gunshots, the smell of copper in the air, the heavy duffel bag of cash. It all rushed back, suffocating and immediate. I didn't have a choice. I was surviving. And you're still surviving, Desiderio pointed out, gesturing to her rigid posture. You carry a weapon in your pocket. You sit facing the door. You're a civilian, but you have the eyes of a soldier. I did that to you. Yes, you did. I can't undo it, Desiderio said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, refusing to let her look away. I can't give you back your ignorance, but I can offer you a truce. Kaylee frowned, her brow furrowing. A truce? We aren't at war. We are at war with our own memories, Desiderio corrected. He reached into his coat pocket. Kaylee tensed instinctively, but he only pulled out a heavy metal key on a simple ring. He slid it across the formica table. It stopped inches from her coffee mug. What is that? She asked. I bought a house, Desiderio said. 3 miles up the coast, deep in the pines. Gated, secure. It's completely off the books. Kaylee stared at the key. The implication was heavy, pressing down on her chest. You're moving to Oregon? I have a city to run. I can't leave New York permanently, but I can disappear for a few days a month. He kept his voice deliberately neutral, hiding the immense risk he was taking. When the noise gets too loud, when the paranoia starts pulling me under, I'm going to come here. He pointed a finger at the key. You don't have to take it, Desiderio continued. You don't ever have to unlock that door. But if you're tired of wedging a chair under your doorknob, if you're tired of being the only person in the room who knows what a gunshot actually sounds like, you have a place to go. A place where the perimeter is actually secure, where you don't have to pretend you aren't broken. Kaylee looked at the piece of metal. It wasn't a romantic gesture. There were no flowers, no promises of a fairy tale ending. It was an acknowledgement of shared trauma. It was an offer of mutual sanctuary from a man who destroyed lives for a living. It was terrifying. If I take that key, Kaylee said, her voice dropping to a whisper, I am stepping back into your world. No, Desiderio replied softly. You're letting me step out of mine. The diner was quiet. The neon sign buzzed. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault against the glass. Kaylee thought about the long, cold nights in her rented cottage. The suffocating isolation of carrying a secret she could never, ever share. She thought about the absolute certainty she felt when Desiderio had put himself between her and a bullet. He was a killer, a criminal, a monster by every definition of civilized society. But he was her monster. Slowly, deliberately, Kaylee reached out. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the key. She didn't put it in her pocket right away. She kept it under her palm, feeling the jagged edges of the cut brass. She looked up at Desiderio. The hollow emptiness in his eyes had shifted. It wasn't hope. Men like Desiderio Edwards didn't believe in hope, but it was something solid. An anchor dropped in a stormy sea. Drink your coffee, Desiderio, Kaylee said, her voice steady for the first time in 6 months. It's getting cold. Desiderio picked up his mug. He took a slow sip of the bitter, burnt coffee. And for the first time since he found a terrified Maid sleeping in his bed, he actually tasted it. If you enjoyed this gritty, grounded mafia romance, please drop a like and hit that share button. Stories like this take hours to craft, and your support helps push this content to other readers who love a dark, suspenseful drama without the cliché tropes. Want more intense, character-driven storytelling where survival is just as important as the romance. Make sure to subscribe to the video and click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what kind of scenario you want to see next.